Aptons are small. Aptons are small, yet they can join forces and manipulate matter, and that's how they create that spark of life. But they can also do many other things by manipulating matter. For instance, if well, you may see them, sometimes, but they are actually attached to everything that is not alive. Like not really alive, but it's not human or an animal. So anything that's not a human or an animal, they are attached to. So everything, and they since they are aware of where you're looking, they will never move while you're looking at them. But you might sense them. There is in any sense then they are invisible. You might sense their presence once in a while. Like perhaps if you've been walking and suddenly you see something out of your periphery and you look over, but nothing's there. Perhaps, or maybe you've seen an animal, a cat or a dog sniffing at something and suddenly they jump back. And when you go to see what's there, there's nothing there. That's likely aptons that are on the move. Okay? So because they are aware of everything, they're aware of where you are and they're aware of where you're looking. Whenever you're looking at them, they stay perfectly still. And they appear to be the object that they are attached to. So they're very rare to be seen by the human eye. Now, they knew Amparo was a special person. And they really appreciated her. So they decided to share their awareness with her. In fact, they trusted her so much that they wanted to, they would manipulate matter to her wish, whatever her desires were. So if she wanted to climb a tree, but there were no branches, branches would suddenly appear, and she'd climb up in the tree. If she wanted to hide from people, which was often, they would build a hedge in front of her to conceal her. Or if she wanted to hide up in a tree, they would create branches up in the tree to conceal her. So they, and anyway, Amparo would walk through the meadows and trees and things like that. And the grasses would part, leading her directly to the best herbs and the best teas that were out there that nature had to provide. Sometimes she would take those herbs and teas into the village whenever she needed something. And she would sell them to the villagers. And that's the only time she talked to the villagers, because she feared them. You remember about the balance of nature. The balance, the part that's responsible for death and destruction, are called entropes. They affect the minds of things that are living. Remember, aptons are the non-living things. Entropes affect the minds. So the villagers, every human and every animal has entropes in their minds. But when they're exposed to stress and chaos, they affect their mind and they become paranoid, or they become suspicious. Okay? So she knew that if she had a relationship with the villagers, they would probably consider her a bit suspicious. One of the reasons is whenever they went to her house, she was never home. She knew when they were coming. The aptons made her aware of when people were coming, so she would hide from them. And they'd go into her house, and her house would be very well kept, but she was never there. They thought that mysterious nature was odd, and they began to think ill of her. They began to think that perhaps she was up to no good and up to evil. The only good thing about the village was that she met Marcela. Now, Marcela was a cute little 5-year-old girl. She belonged to the Ortiz family, and she lived on the outskirts of town with her family, and the next house outside of them was Amparo's house. Now, Marcela, the reason she was so excited about meeting her was because she, too, had a connection with nature and aptons. The aptons made Amparo aware of that. And so when Marcela was walking in the woods, she was taking paths to pick flowers one day, and the aptons were guiding her to the most beautiful flowers. And she walked all the way up to Amparo's house, never afraid of anything. The aptons basically were protecting her. She didn't know that, though, because she was so young. But she went to Amparo's door, Amparo knew she was there, but she didn't hide this time. So she opened the door, and Marcela reached up with her flowers and said, "These are for you." And Amparo, she was so excited. She said, "Oh, thank you. They're so beautiful. They're so beautiful." And Marcela said, "I knew you would love them. I just knew you would." So that was the first visit that Marcela had with Amparo. And they visited more often after that. And Amparo grew to love Marcela and wanted to teach her everything she could about these skills and these aptans. And one thing she told her is never hide like I do from people, because you're too young and people will not understand that. So she said, okay. But back and forth she went. Well, one day Marcela wanted to go see Amparo. And she asked her mom, "Can I go see Amparo?" And her mom said, "No, you cannot. You stay here. You need to work in your house. You need to clean up around here." And Marcela was just very upset. "But I want to go see Amparo." And she said, "No." So she decided to hide from her mom. And just a few feet away, the Aptons hid her from her mother. Her mother couldn't find her. She was out of her wits and finally left the house. And then Marcela took off, went up to Amparo's house. Well, when Amparo found out what happened, she immediately took her back to her mother's house and said, "I'm so sorry. Here's your daughter." And she was happy. Her mom was very happy with that. But she was also very concerned that Marcela disappeared. So she decided to go into the village and talk to the village preacher about it. Now, the village preacher was under a lot of stress. Everybody in the village was bothering him constantly. There was construction going around his house, lots of chaos. The entropes in his brain were really going at it. So he was super suspicious. He was already suspicious of Amparo. Now that Marcela disappeared, he thought, "Oh my goodness, Marcela must be a protege of that witch Amparo." So he got his group together the next morning and he headed up to Amparo's house. Amparo knew they were coming, so she hid up into the oak tree. On they come, and they're mad, they're screaming, "Let's go get her, let's go get her." They get out, they surround her house, they say, "Come out, witch, come out!" Well, she didn't come out, she was hiding. They broke down the door. When they broke down the door, she wasn't there. So they said, "We've got to find her and burn her with Marcela. We have to burn those witches." You see, back in those days, in America, there was the Salem witch trials, and they burned witches at the stake. So they found, Amparo got very concerned when they started talking about burning Marcela. She loved Marcela, so she couldn't handle that. So she had to make herself known to the preacher, and she did. She went up to the preacher, and everybody was watching, and she said loud enough, she says, "I am no witch. Indeed, I am like the mother to this earth. I only want to protect it. But I tell you this, if you harm a hair on her head or burn me at the stake, this land will be blighted for 300 years. And the preacher was so infected with these entropes, he says, "You're going to burn, witch, and so will Marcela, and she'll watch you burn." Well, the next day, indeed, they burned Amparo at the stake. And while she was burning, the smoke became so thick that they couldn't see her. And she died. And while she died from the smoke and everything, she was no longer a human. So the Aptons took her essence away. And they took her essence over to where the preacher was holding Marcela captive. And she appeared again in Marcela's room. A shimmering woman with a long skirt. Couldn't say anything. And she reached over and she stroked Marcela's cheek for a moment and then ran over to the locked door and she unlocked the door for Marcela. And Marcela was able to escape with her family, escape the village, never to return. But when she did leave, Amparo's essence went with her. Shortly after that, the villagers all noticed all the plants, all their crops, everything dying, wilting right there in front of them. And they thought, "Oh my gosh, what's going on? We must have made a huge mistake. Amparo couldn't be a witch. Only witches that are alive can do this sort of thing. She must have indeed been Mother Nature." They've decided that they've killed Mother Nature. The preacher, they were so mad at him. It was his fault. they ran him out of town and they burned down his church. And they all basically left. And the one thing that they came out with that was, you don't fool around with Mother Nature. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.